12-year-old Frank Projicki smells smoke in the stairwell. It's 10 a.m. on a perfect June morning, and the General Slocum is steaming up the East River with 1,358 passengers, mostly women and children from his church's Sunday school picnic. He runs to the pilot house to warn Captain Van Schaik. The captain's response will haunt the investigation. "Shut up and mind your own business." Behind them, flames are feeding on 13 years of accumulated oil, rotted fire hoses, and fraudulent life preservers weighted with iron bars. In less than 20 minutes, over 1,000 people will be dead. This is the story of how a beautiful boat became a floating coffin, and how the deadliest disaster in New York City history was entirely preventable. If you could stand on the waterfront of Lower Manhattan in the summer of 1904, you would see her gliding past, a great white wedding cake of a steamboat, 3 decks high, her twin paddle wheels churning the East River into foam. 250 feet from bow to stern, 70 feet wide across her guards, big enough to hold the entire population of a small town, and on summer weekends she often did. Her name was painted proudly on her hull, General Slocum. She was what they called an excursion steamer, a floating pleasure palace built for the Sunday crowds, the church picnics, the company outings that poured out of Manhattan's tenements every summer weekend in search of fresh air and open water. For 13 years, she had carried the working people of New York to beaches and picnic groves along the Sound, and her captain boasted that he had ferried nearly 1 million passengers without a single fatality. Look at her more closely. Her hull is constructed entirely of white oak, locust, and yellow pine, good American timber, though perhaps you notice how thick the paint is, layer upon layer applied over the years. The interior gleams with polished sycamore and red velvet upholstery. 250 electric lights illuminate her saloons, a remarkable luxury in 1904. Her engine is a marvel of the steam age, a single-cylinder vertical beam engine, what river men call a walking beam, driving 2 paddle wheels, each 31 feet in diameter, 26 paddles per wheel, churning her along at 16 knots, fast enough to make the trip to Long Island Sound and back while the sun is still high. She was promoted as unsinkable thanks to 3 watertight compartments, something entirely new then in such craft, as her builders proudly declared. The Knickerbocker Steamship Company, which owned her, promised safety, comfort, and a fine day on the water for 15 cents a head. What you cannot see standing on that waterfront is what lies beneath the fresh paint. You cannot see the forward cabin, a room roughly 30 by 28 feet that was meant to be a passenger space but has been converted into a storeroom. Inside are barrels of oil for the lamps, cans of kerosene and paint, sacks of charcoal, oily rags, the ship's dynamo humming with electricity, and the steering engine. The crew uses open flames in this room regularly. Oil has been spilled on the deck more times than anyone has bothered to count. You cannot see that the fire hoses, coiled in their racks, have never been used since they were installed in 1891. 13 years of rot turning cheap, unlined linen into dust. You cannot see that the 6 lifeboats are wired in place and painted shut. You cannot see that the life preservers hanging on the upper decks have been exposed to the elements for over a decade, their solid cork disintegrating into powder, their canvas covers rotting, their weight fraudulently maintained with iron bars hidden inside by a manufacturer more interested in profit than survival. On the morning of June 15th, 1904, none of this will matter to the 1,358 passengers boarding for a church picnic. They will see only what you see from the waterfront, a beautiful boat on a beautiful day. They will have no reason to believe they are stepping aboard a floating coffin. Today, almost nothing remains of the General Slocum. The hull was salvaged and converted to a barge, which sank off the New Jersey coast in 1911 and was dynamited by the Army Corps of Engineers. Clive Cussler's Numa team located what may be the wreck in 2000, a magnetic anomaly matching her dimensions, but the wooden bones have long since scattered. What survives are photographs in archives, a memorial fountain in Tompkins Square Park, and a towering granite monument in a Queens cemetery over the mass grave of 61 unidentified victims. And what survives is this, the memory of the deadliest disaster in New York City history until September 11th, 2001. Over 1,000 people will die on the General Slocum in less than 20 minutes, more than the entire population of the neighborhood that sent them. To understand how the General Slocum came to exist, you have to understand what New York was in the 1890s, a city bursting at the seams, its tenements packed with immigrants, its streets choked with horses and pushcarts, and the desperate energy of people trying to survive. By 1890, Manhattan's population had exploded past 1.5 million, and most of them lived in conditions we would find unimaginable today. Entire families crammed into single rooms without windows, without running water, without any escape from the summer heat that turned the Lower East Side into an oven. The excursion trade was the escape valve. Every Sunday, every holiday, every company picnic day, tens of thousands of New Yorkers poured down to the piers and boarded steamboats that would carry them out of the city, up the East River, through the treacherous waters of Hell Gate and into Long Island Sound. There, at beaches and picnic groves with names like Locust Grove and Eaton's Neck, they could breathe clean air, spread blankets on grass, let their children run free. The demand was enormous. And where there is demand, there are men who see opportunity. The Knickerbocker Steamboat Company was formed to serve this market. Its president was Frank A. Barnaby, a businessman whose name would soon become notorious. His secretary was James K. Atkinson. His treasurer was Frank G. Dexter. The board included Robert K. Story, C. DeLacy Evans, Floyd S. Corbin, and Charles E. Hill, men who understood that the excursion trade could be profitable if you kept costs down and packed the boats full. The company already owned the P.S. Grand Republic, built in 1878 and described as the largest steamboat ever constructed exclusively for excursion purposes at the Port of New York, with a capacity of 3,750 passengers. But by 1890, they needed a second vessel, a replacement for the steamboat Columbia, which they had sold to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad 2 years earlier. The contract for the new boat went to Divine Burtis Jr., whose shipyard sat at Conover Street and Atlantic Basin in Red Hook, Brooklyn. The keel was laid on December 23, 1890. The superstructure was built by John E. Hoffmeyer and Son. The engine came from the W&A Fletcher Company of Hoboken, New Jersey, reputable builders all. They named her for Major General Henry Warner Slocum, a Civil War hero who had commanded the 12th Corps at Gettysburg and later served as a New York congressman. Slocum had died in 1894, but in 1891, when the boat was christened, he was still a living legend, exactly the kind of patriotic name that would appeal to the immigrant families who made up the excursion trade. The launch came on April 18, 1891. Miss May Lewis, niece of the company president, christened the vessel as she slid into the water at the Red Hook Yard. A trial trip on June 26th prompted the New York Times to call her a very handsome boat. She was licensed to carry 2,500 passengers, a floating village. Here is what matters about the General Slocum's design, though no one would understand it until it was too late. She was built entirely of wood, in an age when iron and steel hulls were becoming standard. White oak, locust, and yellow pine, beautiful traditional materials that had served shipbuilders for centuries. Also flammable, catastrophically flammable when coated with layer upon layer of oil-based paint and varnish. The company's financial situation would prove equally combustible. The Knickerbocker Steamboat Company had paid no dividends for at least 6 years before 1904. Whatever profits the excursion trade generated were not flowing to shareholders, which meant they were not flowing to maintenance either. When money is tight, the things that get cut first are the things that seem unnecessary. Fire drills that interrupt the schedule, life preservers that sit unused season after season, inspections that cost time and money. For 13 years, the General Slocum sailed the waters of New York Harbor and Long Island Sound. She ran aground 4 months after her launch, off Rockaway Inlet. In July 1894, she struck a sandbar while carrying 4,700 passengers, nearly double her licensed capacity, and the resulting panic injured hundreds. She ran aground again off Coney Island that August. She collided with a tugboat in the East River that September. She collided with another vessel near Battery Park in 1898. In 1901, she carried 900 passengers described by newspapers as intoxicated anarchists from Paterson, New Jersey, and a riot broke out so violent that the crew had to lock passengers in cabins and dock at the police pier. In 1902, she ran aground again, stranding 400 passengers overnight. The Knickerbocker Company was repeatedly cited for overcrowding. By 1904, the General Slocum was described in contemporary accounts as having fallen into disrepair and fast approaching retirement. So was her captain. None of these incidents triggered serious regulatory action. The Steamboat Inspection Service certified her as safe year after year, because that is what the Steamboat Inspection Service did. The inspectors were paid per inspection, a perverse incentive for quick, cursory reviews. The company paid fines when caught overcrowding, then continued overcrowding because the fines were cheaper than turning passengers away. This was the Gilded Age in miniature, a system designed to look like safety while delivering profit. The General Slocum passed her final inspection on May 5, 1904, 5 weeks before she would burn to the waterline with over 1,000 people aboard. Let me introduce you to the people who will step onto the General Slocum on the morning of June 15, 1904. Start with the man in command. Captain William Henry Van Schaik was 67 years old, a weathered veteran of the river trade with a face that had spent decades in salt spray and summer sun. He claimed Dutch descent from a colonial-era Albany family, and he had commanded the General Slocum for all 13 years of her existence. He was the only captain she had ever known. Before that, he had piloted the steamer Sirius for the Iron Steamboat Company. His brother was also a river captain. The Van Schacks were boat people. Van Schack boasted of ferrying nearly 1 million passengers without a fatality. He had received an award in 1903 for his safety record. His weekly salary was $37.50, roughly $1,000 a week in today's money, and he lived aboard the General Slocum to save on rent. He knew her intimately, every creak of her timbers, every quirk of her steering, every mood of the currents at Hell Gate where the East River and Harlem River collide in treacherous eddies and whirlpools. What he apparently did not know, or did not care to know, was the condition of the safety equipment that he was legally responsible for maintaining. He had presided over every one of the Slocum's groundings, collisions, and incidents since 1891. He had never conducted a fire drill in 1904. Only one member of his current crew had ever participated in a fire drill on the vessel, and that drill, conducted the previous year, had not included actually turning on the fire hose. His crew was largely untrained seasonal workers. First pilot Edward Van Wart was 62, experienced but focused solely on navigation. Second pilot Edward M. Weaver was 28, young enough to have different ideas about what to do in a crisis, though he would change his story under oath. Chief engineer B.F. Conklin would prove to be one of the few heroes of the day. First mate Edward Flanagan would be indicted. And then there was John Coakley, a deckhand who had been hired just 18 days before the disaster. He would be the first crew member to see the fire. His actions in the first moments, leaving the door to the burning cabin open, feeding oxygen to the flames, would prove catastrophic. Now meet the passengers. The General Slocum had been chartered for the 17th annual Sunday school picnic of St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located at 323 East 6th Street in the heart of Little Germany. The congregation was overwhelmingly German-American immigrants and their children who had built a thriving community in the tenements of the Lower East Side. Pastor George C.F. Haas had led St. Mark's since 1882, when he was hired at age 28, directly out of seminary. His family had emigrated from Germany in the 1840s. He was beloved by his congregation, a gentle man who made his rounds through the ship that morning greeting families, admiring children in their Sunday best, looking forward to a day of picnicking at Locust Grove on Long Island Sound. His wife was aboard, his daughter was aboard, his sister Emma was aboard. They would not all survive. Consider the Liebenau family, 11 members boarding together. Paul Liebenau and his wife Anna, their daughters Helen, 6 years old, Anna, 3 years old, and 6-month-old baby Adela, plus aunts and cousins. They were a prosperous family by neighborhood standards. Paul had a good job. They were dressed in their finest clothes for the occasion. Consider the Kassebaum party, also 11 members, including Deacon Henry Schnood and his entire family. Henry, 32, his wife Anna, also 32, their daughters Mildred, 2, and Grace, 4, Henry's father William, 61, and William's wife Louise, 58. 6 people. 3 generations, one happy family outing. Consider the Prodzicki family, Mary Prodzicki and her 5 children, including 12-year-old Frank, who would be the first to smell smoke and alert the crew. The total passenger count that morning was 1,358, though the exact number is uncertain because no passenger manifest was kept. The company counted 2 children as 1 adult at boarding, and infants may not have been counted at all. What we know for certain is the composition. This was overwhelmingly a crowd of women and children. Fewer than 150 adult males were aboard because this was a Wednesday, a work day. The men were at their jobs. The women had brought the children for the annual picnic. 745 children boarded the General Slocum that morning. Think about that number. 745 children in their Sunday school clothes, carrying flags and picnic baskets, excited about a day on the water. Entertainment was provided by Professor George Maurer's German band, set up on the main afterdeck. 2 policemen, Albert van Tassel and Charles Kelk, were assigned to keep order, though no one expected trouble. This was a church picnic after all. What almost none of these passengers knew, what cultural norms of the era ensured they could not know, was how to save themselves if something went wrong. Most women and children of 1904 could not swim. It was not considered appropriate for women to learn. Their clothing, heavy wool dresses, multiple petticoats, layers of undergarments, would become death traps in the water, absorbing enormous amounts of liquid and dragging them under. As they climbed the gangplank that bright June morning, laughing and calling to friends, the passengers of the General Slocum were stepping into a vessel they could not escape and entrusting their lives to equipment that had rotted into uselessness. They had no way of knowing that within 2 hours, over 1,000 of them would be dead. To understand what happened on the General Slocum, you need to understand the world these passengers inhabited, a world so different from ours that their assumptions about safety, their trust in institutions, their very clothing would prove fatal. This was Theodore Roosevelt's America, the summer of 1904. Roosevelt was president, having assumed office after McKinley's assassination 3 years earlier, and he was in the midst of his first full campaign for election. The progressive era was dawning, but it had not yet arrived. The reforms that would follow the General Slocum disaster, the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, the meatpacking scandals exposed by Upton Sinclair, all of that lay in the future. In June 1904, corporations operated with minimal oversight. Inspectors were paid by the inspection rather than by salary, and the working class took whatever risks the market demanded. Little Germany, Kleindeutschland, as its residents called it, was one of the most vibrant ethnic enclaves in New York City. By the 1850s, New York had the third largest German population in the world, after only Berlin and Vienna. The neighborhood occupied roughly 400 blocks on the Lower East Side and East Village, bounded by 14th Street to the north, Division and Grand Streets to the south, the Bowery to the west, and Avenue D to the east. Avenue B was known as German Broadway. The neighborhood teemed with beer halls and German theaters, singing societies called Gesangverein, sports clubs, and fraternal organizations. German-language newspapers covered local politics. Germans dominated the skilled trades, over 60% of the city's cabinet makers, tobacconists, and barbers, over half of its bakers, shoemakers, tailors, and brewers. This was a community that had built something real in America. Churches, businesses, families stretching across 3 generations. St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church at 323 East 6th Street was the heart of this community. The building itself was a Renaissance revival structure completed in 1848, substantial and beautiful, a statement that German Lutherans had arrived and intended to stay. The church still stands today, converted to a synagogue in 1940 after the community it served had ceased to exist. And here is what you must understand about these passengers. They trusted the system. They trusted that a vessel licensed to carry 2,500 people had been inspected and found safe. They trusted that life preservers bearing official stamps would preserve life. They trusted that the captain of a steamboat who had ferried 1 million passengers knew what he was doing. They trusted because that was all they could do. They were not marine engineers. They were bakers and tailors and housewives taking their children to a picnic. The women's clothing of 1904 deserves special attention because it would kill as surely as the fire. Fashion demanded layers, chemises and corset covers and corsets, drawers and multiple petticoats, heavy wool skirts even in summer, high-necked blouses with long sleeves. A woman fully dressed for a church outing might be wearing 15 pounds of fabric before she put on her shoes. When wet, that fabric could weigh 40 pounds or more. For a woman who could not swim, and most could not because swimming was not considered appropriate for ladies, those clothes became an anchor. The regulatory environment was equally treacherous. The Steamboat Inspection Service was a federal agency charged with ensuring vessel safety, but its structure guaranteed failure. Inspectors were paid by the inspection, creating an incentive to approve vessels quickly and move on to the next fee. The industry they regulated was also their source of income. Cozy relationships between inspectors and operators were the norm, not the exception. The General Slocum's final inspection had occurred just 5 weeks before the disaster. On May 5, 1904, Inspector Henry Lundberg, who had been on the job only 5 months, certified the vessel as safe. He did not examine the fire hoses. He did not properly test the life preservers. He did not notice that the lifeboats were painted shut and wired in place. He did not inquire about fire drills. He collected his fee and signed the certificate. This was normal. This was how things worked in the Gilded Age. And on the bright morning of June 15, 1904, the passengers of St. Mark's Lutheran Church had no reason to know that normal was going to kill them. The morning of June 15, 1904, broke clear and warm over Manhattan. Blue skies, bright sunshine, the kind of June day that made the tenements bearable because you could escape them. By 8 o'clock, families were streaming toward the recreation pier at East 3rd Street, the departure point for the General Slocum. Women in their Sunday best, carrying picnic baskets, children in clean clothes their mothers had laid out the night before. The excitement was palpable. This was the 17th annual Sunday school picnic, a tradition that families planned around for weeks. The vessel was scheduled to depart at 8:45 a.m., but latecomers kept arriving, and friends already on board begged Pastor Haas to wait. He obliged. The General Slocum finally cast off at approximately 9:30 a.m., loaded with 1,358 passengers and a crew of 30. Let us follow survivor Anna Weber aboard. We went on board laughing and talking, the children ahead with my sister. The sun was shining, and the boat glided through the water so smoothly that the children could play around without any danger. Professor Maurer's band struck up German favorites on the afterdeck. Children ran between the rails, waving flags. Adults found spots on the promenade deck, spreading blankets, opening baskets. Pastor Haas made his rounds, greeting families, admiring babies, radiating the gentle warmth that had made him beloved by his congregation. The General Slocum steamed north up the East River at approximately 15 knots. Captain Van Schaik stood in the pilot house, focused on the challenge ahead, Hellgate, where the East River and Harlem River meet in a chaos of competing currents, eddies and whirlpools that had claimed ships for centuries. This was the most dangerous stretch of his regular route, and he navigated it with the full attention it demanded. The passengers had no awareness of Hellgate's dangers. To them, this was simply a pleasant cruise past the Manhattan shoreline, watching the city slide by in the summer sunshine. They could not know that within the hour, Hellgate would become irrelevant, that a danger far closer at hand was about to announce itself. In the forward cabin, the converted storeroom that housed the lamp oil, the kerosene, the oily rags, the dynamo, the steering engine, and, since the night before, several barrels of hay packed around bar glasses. Something was wrong. No one knows exactly how the fire started. The most likely cause was a carelessly discarded match or cigarette igniting the packing hay. The fire may have been smoldering for some time, building heat in the confined space, feeding on the accumulated residue of oil spills and flammable debris that years of neglect had deposited on those wooden planks. What we know is this: at approximately 10 a.m., as the General Slocum approached East 91st Street, a 12-year-old boy named Frank Prodzicki noticed smoke in a stairwell. He ran to find a crew member. Frank found deckhand John Coakley in the bar, having a beer. Coakley went to investigate. He opened the door to the forward cabin and saw flames. What happened next was the first in a cascade of failures that would kill over 1,000 people in less than 20 minutes. Coakley grabbed a piece of canvas and tried to smother the fire. The canvas was tied to the floor. He threw a sack of charcoal on the flames, and then he ran to get help. He left the door open. A fire needs oxygen to burn. In a confined space, it will eventually consume the available air and die down. But Coakley left the door open, and the flames found unlimited oxygen. The fire exploded. Young Frank Prodzicki did what a brave 12-year-old would do. He ran to the pilot house to warn the captain. Van Schaik's response, according to testimony, was to tell the boy, "Shut up and mind your own business." He was navigating Hellgate. He could not be distracted by a child. By the time First Mate Flanagan called the captain through the speaking tube with confirmation of the fire, precious minutes had been lost. And now the crew discovered the true cost of 13 years of neglected maintenance. Flanagan ran to the fire hose. 100 feet of cheap, unlined linen that had never been used since its installation in 1891. Never tested, never replaced. He connected it to the standpipe. The chief engineer built up water pressure. The hose burst. It didn't just fail at one point. It burst in several places, rotten fabric giving way under pressure that it had never been designed to withstand, and certainly could not withstand after 13 years of exposure and decay. No water reached the fire. A crew member brought a backup hose, rubber this time, more reliable. But when the linen hose had blown off its coupling, the old expansion ring remained jammed on the standpipe. In their panic, the crew could not figure out how to remove it. They could not connect the working hose. Hand pumps were available. Buckets were available. Neither was used. The untrained crew, most of whom had been hired within the past few weeks, had no idea what to do. They told the captain they had encountered a blaze that could not be conquered, like trying to put out hell itself. Now Van Schaik faced a decision that would define his legacy and determine who lived and who died. The ship was on fire. His crew could not fight it. He had to beach the vessel immediately. But where? It is approximately 10:05 a.m. The General Slocum is approaching Hellgate. Her forward cabin is fully engulfed in flames, and Captain Van Schaik must make a choice. A tugboat captain spots the fire and pulls alongside, shouting a warning about a pier at 134th Street. But he also warns Van Schaik away. There is lumber stored on those docks, and a burning steamer could ignite the waterfront. Van Schaik later testifies that lumber yards and oil and gas tanks line the Bronx shore around 132nd Street. He fears the steering gear will break down in Hellgate's strong currents if he tries to maneuver toward the Manhattan side. He makes his decision. Full speed ahead. Head for North Brother Island, a quarantine facility in the middle of the river, a mile and a half away. This decision will be debated for years. The Federal Commission will fault Van Schaik severely, documenting multiple places he could have beached safely. Little Hell Gate, the Bronx Bills, alongside Ward's Island, near East 129th Street. Second pilot Ed Weaver will initially tell police that he would have run her in at the foot of East 129th Street, which could have been done in a few minutes' time, though he will recant this statement at trial. But there is something Van Schaik does not consider, perhaps cannot consider in the chaos of the moment. By steaming full speed ahead into the wind, he transforms his vessel into a bellows. The headwind, rushing past the burning bow, fans the flames directly aft along the entire length of the ship. If he had beached at a closer point, the wind would have been behind the fire, containing it to the forward section, giving passengers on the stern decks more time to escape. Instead, the General Slocum races toward North Brother Island at 15 knots, while fire consumes her from front to back. It is 10:07 a.m. The fire has reached the promenade deck. Passengers who were enjoying the river view moments ago now see flames shooting upward from the bow. Panic begins. Pastor Haas will later describe it. When the fire shot up to the top deck and drove the crowd back, the panic was terrible. The crush from the forward part of the boat swept those in the rear along. The women and children clung to the railing and stanchions but could not keep their hold. In the great crush, many women fainted and fell to the deck to be trampled upon. Little children were knocked down. Mothers with their little boys and girls in their arms would give wild screams and then leap into the water. The passengers have one hope: the life preservers hanging on racks on the upper decks. Hundreds of people reach for them simultaneously. The life preservers disintegrate in their hands. Survivor Anna Weber: "Some of them we could not budge, and the others pulled to pieces and spilled the crumbs of cork over our heads. The solid cork that was supposed to provide buoyancy has rotted over 13 years of exposure to weather. But it is worse than that. The Nonpareil Cork Works of Camden, New Jersey, had supplied these preservers in 1891 with a fatal fraud. To meet the minimum weight requirements, they had placed 8-ounce iron bars inside the cork blocks. Cork and iron, one floats, one sinks. The inspectors never discovered the deception. Jacob Miller grabs life preserver after life preserver, 7 in total before he finds one intact. Most passengers are not so lucky. Most passengers are women who cannot swim, children too small to fight for equipment, elderly people crushed in the stampede toward the stern. John Kircher's wife finds a life preserver that seems intact. She straps it onto their daughter Elsie, who cannot swim. She drops Elsie over the side, expecting to see her bob to the surface. Elsie never appears. She sinks as though a stone were tied to her. The iron bars. Survivor Nicholas Belzer fights his way to the lifeboats. He draws his penknife and starts cutting the ropes that hold one boat in place. He succeeds in severing the ropes, but then discovers that the boats are also held by wire, and they are painted shut, layers of paint sealing them to the deck through years of maintenance that never included checking whether they could actually be launched. I drew my penknife and tried to cut away one of the lifeboats. I succeeded in severing the ropes, but when I got that far, I discovered they were held with wire and were immovable. No lifeboats will be launched from the General Slocum, not one. It is 10:10 a.m. The all-wood vessel, coated in layer upon layer of flammable paint, is a torch. Fire races along the port side, driven aft by the headwind. The crowds flee before it, pressing toward the stern, toward the starboard rail, toward anywhere that is not yet on fire. Clara Stewart. It seemed but a few moments later when there was a roar as though a cannon had been shot off and the entire bow of the boat was one sheet of flames. A contemporary newspaper describes the scene, a spectacle of horror beyond words to express. A great vessel, all in flames, sweeping forward in the sunlight, within sight of the crowded city, while her helpless, screaming hundreds were roasted alive or swallowed up in waves. One man, his clothing on fire, leaps over the port rail and is consumed by the massive paddle wheel, 31 feet of churning paddles that cannot distinguish between water and human flesh. Others, blinded by smoke and panic, follow him to the same fate. A 12-year-old boy climbs the ship's flagstaff, escaping the flames that are consuming the deck below him. He hangs there until the heat becomes unbearable. Then he drops into the fire. Those who can swim leap into the East River. But the East River off Hellgate is not a swimming pool. The currents are treacherous. The water is cold, and the drowning non-swimmers who follow them into the water seize onto anyone who can stay afloat, dragging the swimmers under. The women's clothing, those heavy wool dresses, those layers of petticoats, soaks through instantly. 15 pounds of fabric becomes 40. Women who might have survived a few minutes in the water are pulled under in seconds. Catherine Kassebaum has gathered her party of 11 near the stern. The moment I saw the flames, I called all of our party together and told them quietly that if we were to escape alive, we must stick close together. But my words of warning were not more than out of my mouth when there came such a rush of panic-stricken people to the stern of the boat that no human being could have stood up against it. She will lose 6 of her 11. In the chaos, there are acts of extraordinary courage. 13-year-old John Tishner sees his friend Ida Wuski about to faint. He kicks her in the shins, hard enough to shock her awake. He finds a life preserver, one of the rare ones that works, and straps it onto her. She won't jump. He pushes her over the side. Then he jumps after her and holds onto her hair until both are rescued. 12-year-old Louise Gayling has been watching a toddler for another family. When the fire breaks out, she grabs the child and jumps into the river. She keeps hold of that child through the chaos of the water until help arrives. But for every act of heroism, there are 100 tragedies unfolding simultaneously. It is 10:12 a.m. North Brother Island is visible ahead. Captain Van Schaik orders the pilot to run the vessel aground on its shore. The General Slocum strikes the shore bow first. The bow settles into shallow water, 3 feet, maybe 4. Passengers near the front can wade to safety, but physics and Van Schaik's speed work against the desperate crowds at the stern. The stern swings out over deep water. Most of the surviving passengers, having been driven aft by the flames, are now trapped above 25 feet of river. They jump anyway. The promenade deck gives way with a terrific crash, jolting passengers along the outside rails into the water. The starboard section of the hurricane deck collapses, hurling hundreds more into depths they cannot survive. The paddle wheels are still turning, battering anyone who comes near. Mothers throw children into the water, believing the life preservers will save them. The children sink. It is 10:15 a.m. Less than 20 minutes have passed since 12-year-old Frank Proudzicki first smelled smoke. The General Slocum is burning to the waterline. Over 1,000 people are dead or dying, drowned, burned, crushed, trapped. In the water around the wreck, hundreds of bodies float face down, dragged under by iron-weighted life preservers and waterlogged clothing. The ship has been mortally wounded, but the worst is yet to come. The survivors in the water cannot last long. Help is not yet organized, and the dying is far from over. It is 10:15 a.m. The General Slocum lies grounded on the shore of North Brother Island, her bow in shallow water, her stern swinging over depths that will claim hundreds of lives. The vessel is consumed by fire. The water around her is filled with the living and the dead. North Brother Island is home to Riverside Hospital, a quarantine facility for typhoid, tuberculosis, and other contagious diseases. The staff have been watching the burning vessel approach for several minutes. They have seen the flames shooting from the bow. They have heard the screams carrying across the water. Now they are watching people die within sight of shore. Nurse Superintendent Mrs. White does not wait for orders. She drags 2 35-foot construction ladders to the waterline. Hospital workers follow, bringing whatever they can find: ropes, poles, blankets. Quarantined patients, people who are themselves sick, isolated from society, wade into the water to form human chains. Among them is Mary McCann, a young Irish immigrant recovering from measles. She is slight, not built for rescue work, but she swims out again and again, pulling survivors back to shore. She will rescue between 12 and 15 people before exhaustion stops her. Congress will later award her a gold medal for her heroism. Hospital employee Pauline Puetz swims out repeatedly. On one trip, she finds a child caught in the still-turning paddle wheel. She frees the child and brings her to shore, but the hospital staff are too few and the disaster is too vast. Bodies are floating everywhere. The living are mixed with the dead. People are drowning within arm's reach of each other because no one has the strength left to help. And then the tugboats arrive. The most celebrated rescue vessel is the Wade, commanded by Captain James L. Wade, no relation to the pilot. The Wade is a working tugboat, worth 10 years of her captain's savings. When Wade sees the burning Slocum, he does not hesitate. He drives his tug directly toward the disaster. Someone shouts that the Wade will catch fire. Captain Wade's response enters the historical record. "Damn the tug! Let her burn! What's a tug to a human life?" He grounds the Wade at an angle between the burning Slocum and the shore, creating a bridge. Survivors who cannot swim to shore can now crawl across the Wade's deck. At least 78 people will use this bridge to safety. The Wade herself catches fire from the proximity to the inferno, but Wade holds his position. A dozen tugboats converge on the scene. 2 fireboats arrive, pumping water onto the burning hull, too late to save the ship, but perhaps in time to save a few more lives. A police boat joins the rescue. More than 100 other vessels, ferries, launches, anything that can float, crowd into the waters around North Brother Island. NYPD officers Tom Cooney and Tom Skelly commandeer a tugboat and pull 24 people from the water, mostly children. Firefighter Edward McCarroll dives from the Wade again and again, surfacing with survivors. But rescue in these waters is not simple. The currents off Hell Gate are treacherous even in calm conditions. Bodies and survivors are being swept downstream. The water is cold, not cold enough to kill quickly through hypothermia, but cold enough to sap strength from people who are already exhausted, burned, injured, drowning, and the drowning continues. continue. The commission that will later investigate the disaster will conclude that without the tugboats and bystanders, the death toll would have approached 95%. Only about 70 people actually reached North Brother Island shore on their own. Everyone else who survived was pulled from the water by rescuers who risked their own lives to save strangers. Not everyone risked anything. One witness reports seeing a large white yacht flying the insignia of the New York Yacht Club arrive at the scene. Its captain stands on the bridge with field glasses, watching women and children jump overboard, watching them drown, watching the chaos and the horror, and making no effort to assist. He does not lower a boat. He does not throw a line. He watches. The Chicago Daily Tribune will headline the story, "One Man Without a Heart." In the water, people are making choices that will haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. Those who can swim are grabbed by those who cannot. A strong swimmer might save one drowning person, but when 3 or 4 desperate people seize him simultaneously, everyone goes under. Some survivors report fighting off the drowning to save themselves. Others went down trying to save strangers. The life preservers continue to betray their purpose. People who trusted the equipment, who strapped on the canvas vests and jumped believing they would float, discover instead that they are being dragged under. The iron bars hidden inside the cork blocks, the fraud that the nonpareil cork works perpetrated 13 years earlier, is claiming its victims now. Parents who threw their children into the water with life preservers are watching the water where their children should have surfaced. Band leader George Maurer, who was playing German favorites on the afterdeck just minutes ago, is in the water. He can swim, but someone in the panic, someone desperate, someone drowning, climbs on top of him to stay afloat. When Maurer's body is recovered, there is a large boot print on his head. Steward Michael McGran sinks to the bottom of the East River, clutching the day's cash receipts. He will not let go of the money even to save his life. Pastor Haas is in the water, badly burned but alive. He is searching for his wife. He is searching for his daughter. He will find neither. The Libano family, 11 members who boarded together, is scattered across the disaster. Paul Libanow is in the water, severely burned. His wife, Anna, has their 6-month-old baby Adela clutched to her chest. Anna's own clothing is on fire as she jumps from the burning deck. Somehow, in the chaos of impact and submersion and desperate swimming, she keeps hold of her infant daughter. Anna Libanow survives. Baby Adela survives. Their daughters, Helen, 6 years old, and Anna, 3 years old, do not. 2 aunts do not survive. 2 cousins do not survive. Of the 11 Libanows who boarded the General Slocum that morning, 5 will live to see another day. The Kassabaum party fares worse. Catherine Kassabaum, who tried to keep her group together, survives. But Deacon Henry Schnood and his wife Anna are gone. Their daughters Mildred and Grace, 2 and 4 years old, are gone. Henry's father William and stepmother Louise are gone. 6 people, 3 generations, 1 family erased. 11-year-old Willie Kepler, who joined the excursion without his parents' permission, is a strong swimmer. He makes it to shore on his own. 12-year-old Frank Prodzicki, who first smelled the smoke and tried to warn the captain, survives. His mother Mary and 4 of his siblings do not. 13-year-old John Tishner, who kicked his friend Ida Wuski awake and pushed her overboard, is still holding onto her hair when rescuers pull them both from the water. 12-year-old Louise Galing, who jumped with the toddler she was babysitting, has not let go. Both survive, but for every child who lives, a dozen more are dying. It is 10:25 a.m. The General Slocum has been burning for approximately 25 minutes. She is now little more than a skeleton of fire. Her upper works collapsed, her hull glowing with heat. The wooden structure that carried 1,358 passengers to their church picnic is disappearing before the eyes of everyone watching from shore. The last survivors who can be reached have been pulled from the water. The rescuers are now recovering bodies. They will be recovering bodies for days. The dead float face down in the East River, their heavy clothing dragging them just below the surface. Women in their Sunday dresses, their petticoats spread around them like dark flowers. Children in the clothes their mothers laid out the night before. Many still wear the useless life preservers that pulled them under. Some bodies have already drifted downstream with the Hell Gate currents. They will wash up on shores as far away as Brooklyn in the coming days. Others are tangled in the wreckage of the Slocum herself, trapped beneath collapsed decking, caught in the still paddle wheels. The water around North Brother Island is stained with ash and debris and worse. On shore, the survivors are in shock. Many are badly burned, their clothes melted into their flesh, their hair singed away, their hands and faces blistered from flames they barely escaped. Many are injured from the panic, the falls, the collapsing decks. Many are simply shattered, sitting on the shore staring at the burning wreck, waiting for family members who will never emerge from the water. The staff of Riverside Hospital do what they can. Their facility is a quarantine hospital, not an emergency room, but they have beds and bandages and morphine. Survivors are brought inside and laid on cots beside tuberculosis patients. The healthy and the sick, the saved and the dying, crowded together in a building designed for isolation. By 11 a.m., the fire has burned itself out. What remains of the General Slocum is a charred hull, still smoking, settled into the mud of North Brother Island's shore. The death toll is not yet known. It cannot be known because no passenger manifest exists. The Knickerbocker Steamboat Company did not keep track of who boarded their vessels. They only counted, and they counted 2 children as 1 adult, and they may not have counted infants at all. What the rescuers know is this: they have pulled perhaps 300 people from the water alive. They have pulled perhaps twice that many dead, and there are still hundreds more, still floating, still drifting, still trapped in the wreck. The word reaches Manhattan before noon. On the Lower East Side, in Little Germany, the news arrives in fragments. A boat has burned. There are casualties. The church picnic, the St. Mark's picnic. Something has gone wrong. Men leave their jobs and rush to the waterfront. They crowd onto ferries heading for North Brother Island. They push toward any official who might have information. They scan the lists of survivors that are being hastily assembled at hospitals and morgues. The lists are short. The lists of the dead grow longer by the hour. By evening, the scope of the disaster is becoming clear. The East River has given up hundreds of bodies. Temporary morgues have been established along the waterfront. Coroner's wagons move through the streets of Lower Manhattan in a continuous procession. In Little Germany, the wailing begins. The neighborhood that sent over 1,000 women and children to a picnic that morning is learning that most of them are not coming home. The final casualty count would take weeks to establish, and even then, it remained imprecise. The official USCG Commission report documented the following. Of 1,358 passengers aboard, 893 were confirmed dead and identified. Another 62 were missing and presumed dead. Bodies never recovered or recovered but never identified. The total crew numbered 30. 2 died. Add in bodies recovered later, victims who died of injuries in the following days, and the most commonly cited death toll is 1,021. Other sources conflict. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle reported 1,204 dead or missing. The police report listed 1,031. The New York City Department of Charities documented 924 confirmed dead or missing. The discrepancies stem from the absence of any manifest, the chaos of the rescue, the difficulty of identifying badly burned remains, and bodies that were never found. What is certain is the composition of the dead. Of approximately 1,358 passengers, perhaps 745 were children. Fewer than 150 were adult males. The vast majority of the dead were women and children, the Sunday school students and their mothers who had boarded a steamboat for a picnic and found instead a floating crematorium. The survival rates tell their own story. Men survived at far higher rates than women. They could swim, their clothing did not drag them under. They had the physical strength to fight through the panic. Children died in appalling numbers, especially young children who could not swim and could not understand what was happening to them. Over 600 families lost at least one member. Many lost everyone. The Schneider family, all 6 of them, 3 generations, was entirely erased. Henry and Anna, Mildred and Grace, William and Louise, gone. The Toneport family, Frida, 27, Francis, 4, Charlotte, 1.5, was entirely erased. The neighborhood buried its dead in waves. Lutheran Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens, now Lutheran All Faiths Cemetery, received approximately 660 Slocum victims, including 61 unidentified dead, who were placed in a mass grave. One contemporary account reported 156 funerals in a single day. For weeks, funeral processions moved through the streets of Little Germany at a rate of 1 every 4 minutes. The grief did not end with the funerals. Andreas Steele, a survivor, killed himself 5 months after the disaster. Joseph Vollmer committed suicide on the day after the annual memorial service, 6 years after the fire. George Feldhuisen did the same years later. Paul Libanow, who had pulled his wife Anna and infant daughter Adela from the burning wreck, never recovered. He was badly burned. He contracted pneumonia. He was never mentally whole again. He died in 1910 at the age of 38 from causes that the death certificate could not fully capture. Pastor Haas survived, badly burned. His wife did not survive. His daughter's body was never found. His sister Emma spent a year in a New York hospital undergoing skin graft operations. Haas continued to lead St. Mark's Lutheran Church for years afterward, preaching to a congregation that was missing most of its women and children. Captain Van Schaik survived. He had been at the wheel when the Slocum grounded, and he was pulled from the water like everyone else. He would later claim that he had done everything possible to save his passengers. The investigation would disagree. The machinery of accountability began grinding within hours of the disaster. Bronx coroner Joseph Berry ordered an inquest to begin on June 20th, 5 days after the fire. President Theodore Roosevelt, informed of the catastrophe, ordered the formation of a federal commission of investigation on June 23rd. Roosevelt appointed Lawrence O. Murray, Commissioner of Corporations, as chairman, joined by Brigadier General John M. Wilson and Commander Cameron Maciar Winslow. The commission began hearings on July 19, 1904, at 17 Battery Place in Manhattan. Over the following months, they would interview survivors, examine evidence, and produce an 80-page report that would become the definitive account of what went wrong. The findings were devastating. The General Slocum, the commission concluded, was a shell of highly combustible, frequently painted, extremely dry wood, a mere tinderbox. The fire hoses had never been tested or used since installation in 1891. The life preservers were rotten, their cork disintegrated, their canvas covers split. The lifeboats were immovable, wired in place and painted shut. No fire drills had been conducted. The master, Captain Van Schaik, made no attempt whatsoever to fight the fire, to examine its condition, or to control, assure, direct, or aid the passengers in any way whatever. He had ordered full speed ahead, into a headwind, fanning flames that might otherwise have been contained. He had passed multiple opportunities to beach the vessel at safer locations. His decision to ground the bow in shallow water while the stern swung over deep water had drowned hundreds of passengers who might otherwise have survived. The crew was unfitted to meet any such emergency, untrained, inexperienced, overwhelmed. The inspection system had failed completely. The certificate of safety issued 5 weeks before the disaster was a lie. Inspector Henry Lundberg had been on the job only 5 months. He had not examined the fire hoses. He had not properly tested the life preservers. He had not noticed that the lifeboats could not be launched. He had collected his fee and moved on. The Nonpareil Cork Works had committed fraud. By placing iron bars inside cork blocks to meet weight requirements, they had manufactured devices designed to drown the people who trusted them. President Roosevelt himself commented on this last point in a letter accompanying the official report. The cork fraud, he wrote, was of so heinous a character that it is difficult to comment upon it with proper self-restraint. A federal grand jury returned indictments on July 29, 1904. 8 people were charged: Captain Van Schaik, Inspectors Henry Lundberg and John W. Fleming, and Knickerbocker Steamboat Company executives Frank A. Barnaby, James K. Atkinson, Frank G. Dexter, Captain John Pease, and 1 additional company official. Separately, the manager and 3 employees of Nonpareil Cork Works were also indicted. 8 indictments. Surely, with over 1,000 dead, someone would be held accountable. Inspector Lundberg was tried first, 3 separate times for manslaughter. 3 separate juries could not reach a verdict. All 3 trials ended in mistrials. On May 25, 1905, Lundberg walked free. Once the inspector was acquitted, the company executives had their defense. The inspector told us everything was fine. How could we be blamed for trusting the government's own safety certification? All charges against the Knickerbocker Steamboat Company officials were dropped. The Nonpareil Cork Works managers were indicted but never convicted. That left Captain Van Schaik. His trial began on January 10, 1906, before Judge Edward B. Thomas in federal court. The prosecution was led by Ernest E. Baldwin and U.S. District Attorney Henry Thurser Burnett. Van Schaik's defense attorneys, Terence J. McManus and William M. K. Olcott, argued that their client had done everything reasonable under the circumstances, that he had faced an impossible situation and made decisions that seemed sound at the time. On January 27, 1906, the jury returned its verdict. Van Schaik was guilty on 1 of 3 charges: criminal negligence for failing to maintain proper fire drills and fire extinguishers. The jury deadlocked on the 2 manslaughter counts. Judge Thomas sentenced the 69-year-old captain to 10 years at Sing Sing. Van Schaik appealed. On February 12, 1908, the appeal was denied. He entered Sing Sing to begin his sentence, but the story does not end there. Van Schaik had married during the interval between conviction and imprisonment. A woman named Grace Mary Spratt, his nurse at Lebanon Hospital, 30 years his junior. Grace Van Schaik believed her husband had been made a scapegoat for the failures of others. She launched a petition campaign to secure his release. She gathered over 200,000 signatures. President Roosevelt refused to grant a pardon. He refused twice. Van Schaik was paroled on August 26, 1911, having served approximately 3.5 years of his 10-year sentence. On December 19, 1912, President William Howard Taft granted him a full pardon, effective Christmas Day. The Organization of General Slocum Survivors, the group formed by those who had lived through the disaster, denounced the pardon. It would, they said, lead to more negligence. Van Schaik retired to a farm in Fulton County, New York. He lived quietly until December 8, 1927, when he died at the age of 90. He was buried at Oakwood Cemetery in Troy, New York, initially in an unmarked grave. Of the 8 people indicted for the deaths of over 1,000 passengers, 1 man served 3.5 years in prison. The corporation that owned the vessel paid nothing to victims' families beyond a fine. Under maritime law, the Knickerbocker Steamship Company attempted to limit its total liability to the salvage value of the burned hull, approximately $5,000 or less than $5 per victim. The captain was punished. The company was protected. The inspectors walked free. The cork manufacturers were never convicted. This was justice in the Gilded Age. The dead of the General Slocum did not die entirely in vain. Their deaths forced changes that would save uncounted lives in the decades that followed. In March 1905, Congress amended Section 4405 of the revised statutes, dramatically expanding the authority of the Board of Supervising Inspectors. The new requirements were comprehensive and specific, written in the language of the failures that had killed 1,021 people. Fireproof metal bulkheads were now required on passenger vessels. The all-wood construction that had turned the Slocum into a torch would no longer be permitted. Steam pipe sprinkler systems became mandatory, automatic fire suppression that did not depend on crews remembering to turn on hoses. 1 life preserver per passenger and crew member, with life preservers tested to support specified weights for extended periods. No more cork dust, no more iron bars, no more equipment that killed instead of saved. Lifeboats had to be easily accessible and regularly tested. No more boats painted shut and wired in place. Fire hoses had to meet minimum pressure requirements of 100 pounds per square inch and had to be regularly inspected and tested. No more rotten linen that had never been uncoiled in 13 years. Mandatory fire drills became law. Crew training requirements were established. The casual hiring of untrained seasonal workers to handle emergencies would no longer be tolerated. And critically, inspectors were removed from the per-case payment system that had created incentives for quick, superficial reviews. The corrupt structure that had allowed Henry Lundberg to certify a floating death trap as seaworthy was dismantled. President Roosevelt did more than sign legislation. He fired every steamboat inspection service officer involved in the Slocum's inspection. He ordered a mandatory re-inspection of all steamers in the Port of New York. The re-inspections revealed that the Slocum was not an outlier. Similar deficiencies were widespread across the excursion fleet. The industry had been operating for years with equipment that could not save passengers in emergencies. The U.S. Coast Guard today cites the General Slocum disaster as a turning point in the history of professional maritime safety. The reforms that followed established principles that remain in force: regular testing of safety equipment, trained crews, mandatory drills, independent inspection, and corporate accountability for passenger safety. How many lives have these reforms saved in the 120 years since the disaster? The number is impossible to calculate, but every time a fire breaks out on a passenger vessel and the hoses work, every time passengers don life preservers that actually float, every time a crew executes an evacuation drill they have practiced dozens of times, the dead of the General Slocum are being remembered in the only way that truly matters. The General Slocum burned to the waterline, but she did not disappear entirely. Her charred hull was salvaged and sold in November 1904 to Fred Kramer of Philadelphia, who converted her into a barge named Maryland. She changed hands again in 1907, and in March 1909, she sank in the South River in New Jersey. She was raised and repaired. On December 4, 1911, the Maryland, the vessel that had once been the General Slocum, sank for the final time off Corson's Inlet in New Jersey, laden with a cargo of coke. The Army Corps of Engineers dynamited the remains in February 1912 to clear the shipping channel. In 1994, Clive Cussler's NUMA team searched for the wreck. They found nothing. In 2000, they returned and located a magnetic anomaly matching the vessel's dimensions, 217 feet by 38 feet. It may be her. The wooden bones have long since scattered across the seafloor. Coal from the wreck reportedly still washes ashore after storms, black fragments of a cargo that went down with a ghost ship that was once a floating palace. What survives above water is memory, maintained by those who refuse to let the dead be forgotten. On June 15, 1905, the first anniversary of the disaster, a towering granite monument was unveiled at Lutheran Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens. It stands over the mass grave of the 61 victims who were never identified, the children whose parents died with them, the women whose families could not be found, the bodies too badly burned to recognize. The monument features an engraving of the disaster and lists the names of the dead in German. Angel sculptures flank the stone. A 6-month-old baby named Adela Liebenau, now 1 year old, helped unveil the memorial. The Organization of General Slocum Survivors, founded in the aftermath of the disaster with Charles Dersch as its first president, organized annual memorial services. For decades, survivors and their descendants gathered at the cemetery every June 15th to remember. Attendance declined as the survivors aged and died. The gatherings that once drew thousands now draw dozens. In Tompkins Square Park, in the heart of what was once Little Germany, a marble memorial fountain stands. It was funded by the Sympathy Society of German Ladies and dedicated in 1906. The inscription reads, "They are Earth's purest children, young and fair." The last survivor of the disaster was Adela Liebenau Wotherspoon, the infant whose mother jumped from the burning deck with her clothing on fire and somehow kept hold of her baby through the water and the chaos. Adela lost 2 sisters, 2 aunts, and 2 cousins that day. Her father Paul never recovered from his injuries and his grief. He died when she was 7 years old. Adela lived to be 100 years old. She died on January 26, 2004, 6 months before the centennial of the disaster. In 1999, at a commemoration ceremony, someone asked her why the General Slocum disaster was so much less famous than the Titanic, which killed fewer people 8 years later. Her answer was simple. The Titanic had a great many famous people on it. This was just a family picnic. She was right. The Titanic carried millionaires and celebrities, artists and aristocrats, people whose names the newspapers knew, whose deaths the powerful mourned. The General Slocum carried German immigrant women and their children, Sunday school students and their teachers, people whose names appeared in no society columns, whose deaths mattered only to other immigrants in a neighborhood that most of New York preferred not to notice. And the neighborhood itself was destroyed. Little Germany, Klein Deutschland, did not survive the disaster. The community had been slowly declining since the 1870s as German immigrants achieved enough prosperity to move to better neighborhoods. But the Slocum was the killing blow. By November 1904, more than 27% of families related to victims had left the Lower East Side. They moved to Yorkville on the Upper East Side, to Williamsburg in Brooklyn, some back to Germany itself. The women and children who died on the Slocum were the social fabric of Little Germany, the people who maintained the churches and the singing societies, who raised the next generation, who kept the community alive. Without them, there was no community to keep. World War I accelerated the erasure. Anti-German sentiment made it dangerous to speak German in public, to maintain German traditions, to remember too loudly what had been lost. By the 1910s, Eastern European Jews, Italians, Poles, and Russians had replaced the Germans on the Lower East Side. St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church at 323 East 6th Street, the congregation that chartered the General Slocum for its 17th annual Sunday school picnic, no longer exists. The building still stands, converted to a synagogue in 1940. It is now the 6th Street Community Synagogue. The neighborhood it served has been transformed beyond recognition. What does the General Slocum disaster mean 120 years later? It means that over 1,000 people, women and children, mostly German immigrants, and their American-born sons and daughters, boarded a steamboat on a beautiful June morning for a church picnic, and most of them never came home. It means that corporate negligence, regulatory failure, and individual incompetence combined to create a catastrophe that was entirely preventable. The fire hoses could have worked, the life preservers could have floated, the lifeboats could have been launched, the captain could have beached his vessel at a dozen safer locations, the inspectors could have done their jobs, the company could have maintained its equipment. None of that happened, and so over 1,000 people died in less than 20 minutes, within sight of the largest city in America, on what should have been the happiest day of their summer. It means that the Gilded Age had a price, and the price was paid by people who could not afford it, working-class immigrants whose lives were worth less than the cost of a new fire hose. It means that memory is fragile. The deadliest disaster in New York City history before September 11, 2001, is largely forgotten. The community that would have preserved the memory was itself destroyed. The victims were not famous. The survivors dispersed. The neighborhood vanished. What remains is a monument in a Queens cemetery, a fountain in a Manhattan park, and the words of survivors recorded in testimony and newspaper interviews, children's screams, cork dust falling from rotten life preservers, a captain telling a 12-year-old boy to shut up and mind his own business. And what remains are the reforms, the regulations and requirements and inspection protocols that make passenger vessels safer today than they were in 1904. Every life preserver that floats, every fire drill that trains a crew, every inspection that catches a deficiency before it becomes a disaster. These are the General Slocum's legacy. The dead of the General Slocum cannot be brought back, but they can be remembered. They can be honored, and the lessons written in their deaths can continue to save the living. On a summer day, if you take the ferry past North Brother Island, now abandoned, overgrown, closed to the public, you pass the place where a burning steamboat grounded its bow in the shallows and swung its stern over deep water. The shore looks peaceful now. The water is calm. You would never know that over 1,000 people died here in 20 minutes of fire and water and screaming chaos on a Wednesday morning when they had only wanted to take their children to a picnic. But they did, and we should remember